And if they have to start a business, I'll help them do so. And the goal is that they can generate enough profit that they don't just have, a little bit of money that they can roll back into their business, but that they begin to be able to invest in their future. So then they can reach out to Brian to figure out, what sort of investment strategies should they take advantage of. So we've had students who have started, Roth IRA accounts. We've had students who have, gotten very diversified portfolios and index funds. So the key to that though is that it always goes back to, hey, I've got this idea and what should I do with it? How do I actually begin to monetize a hobby? What does that transition look like between having a skill or a hobby and actually turn it into a business? And that's where value comes into play. It can be a valuable act that you commit to, it can be a talent that you have, but unless it has some sort of value to the greater community or to a group that you're a part of, and you can't necessarily profit off of it, you're going to have challenges. So, we're going to talk tonight about a couple of different strategies that you can incorporate and think about. Some are psychological, some are accounting based, some are like, psychosocial and emotional. But we're going to try to hit a couple of different rungs on the ladder as we work our way through. So, thank y'all for joining us. Brian, will you hit the next slide for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll be quick. Just want to say thank you. This is a dream collaboration for me and James. We're big fans of Creative Charlotte for many years. So thanks for having us. We're really excited.
Yeah, thank you. So, one of the first places is where you have that sort of hair on fire feeling of there is a lot. There is a lot to do. I want to sell my products. Do I need to get an LLC? How do I price my materials? This can be your brain in any given second. There's just so much happening. And these ideas often put you in another tricky place. They might lead to some really frustrating questions. So, Brian, will you hit the next slide? These are some of them. Um, You can play around with definitions of success. How do you think about improvement? How do you even market a business? What about payment? Are you self-employed? Do you have employees? How do you ensure that you have the proper profit margin? What about scaling it? Should you take a job even if it doesn't pay? Should you take a job with friends knowing that it won't pay? Should you be discounting stuff because you really like the people that you're creating it for? What about sourcing? Is it okay to source things that are a little bit more expensive if it's from a friend? So ultimately, all these questions can be distilled down to one that is central. And they all are important, but they all are sort of branches off of the main trunk of this one tree. So, Brian, we hit the next slide. This is really the main issue that you need to be able to address. Can you make a living doing the creative pursuit that you love? Is this something that is a side gig, or is this something that can eventually become an actual career opportunity for you? And obviously, I'm not asking fourth graders and sixth graders and ninth graders if they're going to be able to sell cookies or brownies or jewelry for the rest of their life. That's not where they're at. It can be a great side hustle, and they're going to pick up a lot of great skills along the way. But I think a lot of people would love the sort of freedom that comes with being an entrepreneur, especially one where you can combine creativity and you can fuse your hobby or your skill with something that you really love, and you can create and you can make a great living off of that. So, let's talk about some of the ways to do so. So, there's all this discussion in the news. You've probably heard it from parents, grandparents, friends, family members. You've probably gotten side eyed a lot in the past if you told them that you were leaving a very stable 9 to 5 or a very stable corporate gig and you wanted to strike out on your own. And I'm sure that many people in this chat room have heard the consummate question of, "Oh, is there money in that? Is that valuable?" And not shockingly, especially to you because y'all all do this, but Brian, we hit the next slide. There's tremendous value, not only nationally, but internationally. You can look at some of these statistics. Creatives are some of the most sought after and valuable individuals in society and in corporations. The biggest issue, though, is that a lot of creative individuals don't always have the tools or the mindset necessary to push forth and actually grab the value that they're worth. So that's one of those really interesting constraint issues, friction points, where society says yes, very valuable. Creating anything from nothing, going from 0 to 1, is incredibly useful, but we're not going to pay it like it's worth. We're not going to pay the appropriate value. And this is where there's a giant disconnect. So we're going to try to look at that again. So this is international data. So let's look at something. Let's think about creative entrepreneurs. It's not just a singular skill. If you look at most businesses or even other jobs that people might have, usually they get really good at accomplishing one or two tasks in the course of their day. They become specialists. They become really good at siloed skills. Entrepreneurs are not like that. They have to be master generalists. So Brian, if you can go to the next slide. So on top of being a creative master, creative entrepreneurs are forced to market all of these other, or to be even better at all these different skills. And it's not just getting better at one skill, it's getting better at a ton of incredibly valuable skills that you can market, you can advertise on. But it's interesting. It's almost like being a sort of human Swiss Army knife that just because it has to happen, you get better at it. Um, and this is something that a lot of people don't always think about. They think about a creative entrepreneur as like, oh, that person paints. Great. They must be a great painter. No, that is a significant oversimplification. That person has remarkable soft skills. That person must have incredible social media savvy. That person must be really good at hopefully pricing as well. That person must be really good at sourcing, at time management. There's all kinds of other ways to also, talk about the abilities that individuals have. So if we know that a person already has sort of intrinsic value, that value is being offered to society, we've got to think about the minimum values in terms of costs. So, as a self employed individual who's a creative entrepreneur, what do you have to account for yourself? What's just the base minimum that you have to ensure that you make? AKA, what do you have to give to the government? So, Brian, let's look at everybody's favorite topic, taxes. So, this is important to take note of. This is a federal mandate. So, the self employment tax rate is 15.3%. The large lion's share of that goes straight to Social Security, as it continues to exist, hopefully for another decade or two. Until then, we'll be getting taxed ruthlessly for it. And then 2.9% for Medicare, for healthcare. If you are a remarkably talented and self employed creative entrepreneur and you are crushing it, your self employment tax might go up less than one
Sorry.
percentage point. And if it does, you can look at some of these threshold amounts. You can think about what your partner might make, what you might make if you file independently. But that's also something that you want to keep in mind here. And there's some other avenues to kind of get around it. But at the very least, you have always got to account for being able to pay these tax rates. I wish I could say that there was a higher threshold for when you actually become qualified to start paying for them, but it's quite low. As soon as you make your first $400, Uncle Sam is going to be knocking on your door, and they're going to be looking to ring you out for coins. Even if you work affiliated with a church, the bar is even lower. So once you make your first $108, if you're associated with a church, Uncle Sam is coming for you. So even if you think you've got a great gig, great side hustle, maybe you happen to be getting paid exclusively in cash and it might not be trackable, but if you do get paid in traceable methods, if you file a W-9, if you are filing appropriately with some of the people who are reaching out to pay you and there are checks involved, you're going to need to be filling out a 1040, and there's a very specific form for it at the end of the year, and disclosing that and making sure that you're covering this percentage amount. Brian, you're usually sharper on taxes than I am. Am I missing anything here?
No, it sounds perfect. I think just Uncle Sam's coming. There's just no way around it. Teachers, creatives, it doesn't matter. So no, this is a great way to start, James. Is always have that tax cash on hand, ready to roll. So just please be prepared, especially if you're self-employed, right?
Yeah, and I promise the fun stuff is coming. We usually just like to talk about sort of playing defense. What do you have to make sure you account for before you can really start to stack up your bread? So, apart from federal taxes, something you cannot sidestep once you make $401 from your endeavor, you have to also account for healthcare. It's not a mandate, but you do. The risk and reward here is just brutal. Um, Healthcare debt is undefeated. It will not only follow you to the grave, it will also follow dependents. So this is something that you also need to make sure that you're accounting for, whether it be through, Brian, you can hit the next slide, whether it be looking at different tax credits you might be able to take advantage of. There's a website right here, healthcare.gov. You can look by state, number in household, estimated income. you can look to see if you qualify for certain sort of premium, you know, saving credits that might qualify you for different kinds of Medicaid and CHIP opportunities here. You can obviously shop the independent marketplace. It's also really valuable if you might have a partner. Um, you would really, it might be worthwhile to look into that healthcare opportunity, especially because setting up HSAs for a self-employed individual, especially for an entrepreneur, it's often really challenging. It's usually a lot easier to set up an HSA through an established organization. Schools, hospitals, government agencies, they are ripe with opportunities to, bridge for an HSA. And I see Brian smirk starting whenever the word HSA gets mentioned. He gets really excited. I can almost see your tail wagging in the background. Um, so Brian,
The
why are
grins.
HSAs so valuable?
Yeah, so thanks for that, James. Oh, I think some people are entering the room. Let me. Okay, we're good. So James is absolutely correct that as a financial coach, financial teacher, spoken to so many financial advisors over the past couple of years. The HSA is one of the most slept on accounts that there are. This is every financial advisor's favorite account, and for good reason. So if you have an opportunity to be a part of an HSA, I would strongly look into it. So there's a couple reasons. One, it's pre-tax, so you can contribute to the HSA with pre-tax money. Okay, the money will go into an HSA. It's kind of like a holding fund, right? And so you'll get like a debit card with it. You use the card, it comes straight from that. And so when you use that money, it is tax free. So it's money that never really gets taxed, which is amazing if it's used for qualified medical expenses. Okay. Super easy to use. The money is yours. You are fully vested, meaning that wherever you go, switch jobs, that HSA money is yours. No one's touching it. So the HSA gets even better though, because what a lot of people don't know about the HSA is that it is an investable account, meaning you can take money that you've saved in the HSA and invest in the stock market. And so the money will grow and compound as the years go on, which allows you to kind of create this medical nest egg, basically, right? And so it's absolutely crucial. James is always right. Every time he mentions the word HSA, I kind of get this little smile. I get kind of like almost an offsides call. I get excited. I'm ready to talk about it. When you turn 65, it turns into another retirement account, meaning when you turn 65, the money is now, it can be used for any reason. It doesn't need to be a medical expense even. Now, however, the money will be taxed, but once you turn 65, you can use it for any reason. Now, most financial advisors will advise you that you still keep it used for medical expenses because it will be tax free. So it is absolutely an amazing account, especially as you save for your later years for medical expenses.
Excellent, Brian. Thank you so much. Again, once you can address taxes, again, if you have any sort of hobby or any sort of monetizable skill, you're very likely going to hit that $400 threshold rapidly. So you've got to be able to account for your taxes, and you've also got to be able to account for your healthcare. If you have a kid who breaks an arm, I, you're going to get hit with thousands of dollars. The risk reward here, I know it's painful to pay for something like healthcare insurance, especially if you're just starting out, but insurance is one of those really brutal things where you don't need it until you absolutely need it. And you can't really go back and, play a safety card or reload your saved video game. It's just not possible. Okay, so let's start talking about kind of the interesting psychological differences here in valuation, pricing, and negotiation. So, Brian, will you go to the next slide? This is a fun one. So, this is a fun game to play too with students, or if you have any children, you can always ask them, and we can take a response. If anybody, why don't y'all just take 15 seconds and just type it into the chat bar. Is it harder to value a product like ceramic or a service like a pressure washing business? Which one do you think is harder? Interesting. Okay, we've got a fair number of mixed responses. That makes me really happy. That means this is a good topic to hit on. There are way more variables typically in a service based business. If you have a product based business, if you make something like ceramics, you really just have to account for the material cost and your time. That is usually replicable. You can usually, rent out the same space, and you can kind of do the same thing more often than not. If you have a service-based job, you very often are dealing more with people. You're having to account for your time. The other knock here is that, with even a consulting business or a service-based industry, you will not get paid unless you are actively using your time to work towards that goal. There are some exceptions. So you might think about, companies that can eventually develop their own intellectual property. They can lease it to people. They can, sell it for a few years at a time. But by and large, services are far harder to value. And that's worth thinking about, especially if you have a couple of different options and different pathways that you might want to consider pursuing. Um, I usually tell students to at least try it. And I usually tell them also, like, yeah, if you're not sure about your valuation, start it higher. If it's not selling, drop it down. It's a lot harder to start it lower and then move up than it is to start it higher and then move down. Think about when you were little, um, or even if you were in high school, college, wherever. If you had a strict teacher and that teacher got relaxed over the course of the year, you like that. It was always way better. If you had a teacher who came in really relaxed and then got stricter over the course of the year, almost impossible. That teacher struggles. It doesn't happen that way very often or very easily. Brian, anything to add on that one?
No, I mean, you're 100% correct. That's teaching 101. That's the first thing we tell rookie teachers. You can ease up, but you cannot make it tougher. And so I think that's a fantastic analogy to the pricing model for sure.
Yeah. So let's go to the next slide. So, attached to this idea of valuation, there's a really interesting psychological principle called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And if you haven't heard of it before, I don't blame you. It's talked about in a couple of different like Harvard Business Review case studies. You might bump into it in some negotiation classes, perhaps. But it's this really strange thought process on a sort of valuation and learning curve for people who make products, or for even how people estimate their own abilities at really any hobby or game, whatever they play and do. So by and large, data over, thousands and thousands and thousands of different data sets has suggested that once people start something, they immediately think they're incredible at it. And then as they start to learn more about it, their evaluation of their skills and their abilities and how good they could be at something plummets pretty rapidly. And they slowly get better once they kind of bottom out over time. And then they're supposed to experience an uptick. And it's supposed to start to, have that reverse parabola upwards. The problem is a lot of people, especially early entrepreneurs, and especially in the creative marketplace, they don't always experience that uptick. They often will flatline and they'll go horizontal. And the problem here becomes, if you start out and you're like, man, I made these great ceramics. I think I could sell these for $60, $60 a piece. And you might go to a market, or you might go to, a fall fest or something, and maybe you only sell a couple. And maybe you start to practice and you realize like, oh, these first efforts weren't as good as I thought they were. And you drop your pricing, and your pricing stays low, even though the quality of your work is getting better. So a lot of people often should probably think more in terms of, well, a linear experience. Like it should start to go back up once you've realized that, oh, okay, this wasn't as good as I thought it was initially, but now I'm getting significantly better. A lot of people stay static and they just keep that pricing model in place. So again, a lot of people start high when they first begin, and then it plummets. And instead of it getting better over time, instead of it going back up, a lot of people stay horizontal. And that's a problem, right? It's not just that it's a conditioning of low confidence, it's actually sort of ingrained in people. And it's also ingrained in a lot of different cultures. And this is something too that we're going to talk about with negotiations, but and this is something that we were all talking about before the meeting started, Setu. But over time, your sense of valuation is not just it's not just you that dictates it. It's influenced by your parents, your partners, even your kids, sometimes coworkers. So this looks like a really clean, sort of upward parabola here, but it's those lines are a lot more jagged than this clean uptick would suggest. So even in terms of valuation, let's go to the next slide. This is something that people also have to contend with. What happens if you get a low offer? And we're going to talk about this a lot this evening, especially moving forward. You are not ever something that is supposed to amount to the offer that you get. That has no bearing on your human value. So please continue to think about that. But But it's very important that if a company offers ridiculously low pay, salary, a gig, an opportunity for photographs, it's saying that it doesn't necessarily value your work. It's not always saying that, oh, this is the only amount of money that we have. If you get given a low value, they're making a sort of judgment call on your work. But if you accept it, that reinforces it mentally. And this is where this, I'm going to repeat this a lot. We've got to get more comfortable saying no. Having the opportunity to make money is great, but it's a trade-off. It's always a trade-off. It can be time, it can be stress, it can be frustration, it can be, I'm going to have to devote more time to this pursuit than I would to be able to spend with my kids or with my spouse or with, you know, events I like to do for fun. So again, if a company offers you ridiculously low pay or salary or whatever for a gig, there is sort of a value judgment at work there. And that's entirely on them. But if you accept it, that reinforces it sometimes. Okay. And once that pattern is set, it gets really hard to break out of that pattern. Okay. So let's look at some of the pillars of pricing. So let's go to the next slide, Brian. This is Monique Malcolm. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of her. She is absolutely incredible. She's got a blog, she's got two different podcasts that she hosts. Some of the principles that I talk about with pricing, they're really closely aligned with a lot of what she discusses. But she is this sort of like women of color guru who's always talking about trying to revamp and re-understand your value. So why do you think she finds so much success with women of color and finding better ways of pricing? If you want to type it into the chat bar, go ahead. Why do you think somebody who caters specifically to a demographic that is women of color and she's trying to, rehab concepts of pricing and valuation, why do you think she's found so much success? Yeah. Niche is great. You want to also settle into a niche. Yeah. Personal experience, also perfect. Women of color are the most likely to not negotiate. Historically, they have, not only because of their own circumstances, but pricing models, self valuation, a willingness to negotiate is almost non-existent. At least it has been historically in this demographic. The disparity of pay is the most glaring also in this demographic. You're not looking at 13 cents off the dollar. You're looking at typically 27 to 34 cents off the dollar for this demographic. Pricing is insert whatever expletive you want to, messed up. It's dreadful. So let's look at some of the like five keys that she gives to people. And this is perfect for the creative entrepreneurship community because they all hit. So Brian, hit the next slide. So I just about guarantee you that everybody in this room at some point has priced their goods too low. And that's okay. That's part of the learning process. That's part of that learning curve. As your experience gets better, as that line starts to stretch out, you learn more and you go up. And that's okay. It's recoverable. One of the biggest hurdles here, it's not just attached to getting a good return or a good profit margin on what you're selling. If I go to a fall fest and I see two different bowls and they look the exact same, and one is selling for $2 and one is selling for $10, they could look like the exact same quality and they might even have been made slightly differently. Maybe the $2 one is even more durable, it's even prettier. The problem is psychologically and even connotatively, when people see a low amount next to a product, they attach a low quality value estimation to it. Think about if you're in the grocery store, if you go to a farmer's market and you happen to pass by a couple of different full containers, it's like, oh, there's a lot of carrots there. Oh, there's a lot of turnips there. And then you get to the onion basket, and there's only two onions left. Your thought is not, oh my gosh, the onions must have been incredible. Somebody took all the onions. They must be delicious. Your thought is, what's wrong with those two onions? Which is odd and counterintuitive. But this functions in a very similar pricing model. When people see low value items, they often, unfortunately, think of low value as well. So let's look at the next item. Pricing without profit in mind. This one is jarring. A lot of people, especially creatives who are producing products in particular, this is vital to keep in mind. Direct costs typically refer to something like materials. You've always got to make sure if you're a painter, you've got to account for your canvases, your paint, your paint brushes. You've got to make sure that you at least break even on all those goods. Most creative entrepreneurs are fine with that concept. The problem here becomes what happens if your business grows? There's no cushion, there's no growth opportunity there. What if you have any sort of operating expenses? What happens when you need to actually invest in your business? You can't just keep buying the same models of canvases. What happens if you start to experience a lot of success and you need to sell more than you've been producing? You can't keep selling at that same price point and expect to grow your business. So, you've got to know your numbers. So, how do you account for this growth? This is where we start to become, early stage, getting our feet wet with accounting. So, Brian, will you hit this next slide? This is another jarring stat for you. Harvard Business Review coming right at you. Only one out of every three creative entrepreneurs measures their return on investment. You do not have to be a wizard at Microsoft Excel to set up a really basic one right here. A lot of entrepreneurial endeavors don't even have overhead. Brian and I, we have our own consulting business, but we don't pay for commercial space to market out of. We wake up in the morning and we go back to school and we grade our quizzes and tests and talk to students and do our lunch duty, and we take care of it that way. But a lot of businesses will have this. If you happen to be a painter again and you have a home, maybe you don't have space in your home or your apartment. Maybe you have to rent space. Maybe you have to rent space if you're a baker in sort of a community kitchen. That costs money, and sometimes people don't account for it. So it's vital, absolutely vital, that you think about every single line item involved, even if it's something as simple as paying a graphic design artist a new amount of money to redesign your logo, or even buying new packaging. Stuff like that that often feels really easy to write off as a small purchase. Those 25, $50, $15 purchases over time really add up to something substantial. And if you don't have a cushion for your pricing model, you're going to lose money. You're not going to profit. And that's a way that your hobby that you're trying to make into a business remains a hobby. Let's look at the next slide too, Brian. This will get you excited. It's not quite an HSA, but it's something that you really care about. Any income that you get, any profit that you make, it is vitally important that it does not just go to a standard low percentage interest savings account. You can open up a high yield savings account at any of these banks that have been mentioned here. It doesn't cost any extra money. It takes less than 5 minutes. You can call them on the phone. You can do it on the internet right now tonight, and it's just free money. As your money sits in your business account, it should at least be able to accrue at a significantly higher, um, you know, rate. You don't want to pay 0.01%, or not pay it, but you don't want to gain 0.01%. I mean, Brian's got a phrase. I don't want to steal his thunder here, but what do you always talk about your favorite kind of money be?
Oh man, I mean, there's one type of money that's always my favorite type, and that's free money. Right? If there's gonna be money on the table and it's free, I want a piece of it. And so I think one of the most slept on accounts, the HSA always slept on, and then this high yield savings account. I'm a huge fan. Rates right now are really, really good, right? So most banks are in the fours to fives even at this point, right? So 4 to 5% as opposed to 0.01%. So, I'm not here knocking the big banks, but, being in Charlotte, BOA, Truist, Wells Fargo, atrocious savings account rates, 0.01, zero point zero 0.01, and 0.15 between the big three. So these online high yield savings accounts are fully insured from the FDIC, up to $250,000. It's not an investment. This is a straight up savings account that is paying you, 4 to 5% right now. And again, as an entrepreneur, you always want to have that rainy day money, right? You never know when you'll have a slow month, or a slow couple weeks or whatever. So you always want to make sure you've got that rainy day, right? Especially if, something breaks or some equipment goes down. So having that emergency fund, so vital. and then having it in a account that gets you 4 to 5% interest, it's a win-win. So absolutely look into a high yield savings account. All these banks here are fantastic, super easy to set up, like James said, and he's not exaggerating. It takes about 10 minutes to set up a high yield savings account. I set up one with Marcus. That's with Goldman Sachs. Took about 10 minutes. So super easy, super convenient. You don't have to change your checking account, right? You can just open this up separately from your checking account. So something to look into for sure.
Yeah, if you're somebody who responds well to frustration, like I tend to, there's no friction point apart from the fact that banks just don't think you'll open one. They
Yeah.
literally just don't think you'll take 5 minutes to call them or do it. It's that simple. So
And I
prove a
love
call.
when James was mentioning these psycho kind of analyses types things, right? This is called the status quo bias. Banks are counting on you. They're counting on status quo bias that oh, I check with them, so I'll save with them. So they are counting on that. And as they count on you to do that, they're going to give you an atrocious rate. So
Yeah.
love what James said there. There's very little friction point of creating one. It takes 10 minutes.
Yeah, there's often a misunderstanding too. You can have accounts with multiple banks. Some people think that because they have their checking account or because they have, investment accounts with one bank that they have to be loyal. No, don't. You don't have to do that. I guarantee you these banks are not going to be loyal to you. They are banks. Like find the most advantageous rate and take advantage of it. You can totally have, multiple accounts at different banks. You should do that. All right, let's hop over to the next key of pricing. So this one is kind of related to the previous one, but it's with a twist. So obviously, accounting for materials is important. Accounting for your time is important as well. This part here about pricing with time and effort. Effort is the key. And associated with this is you need to be thinking about who is your ideal buyer. So often entrepreneurs get stuck into this mindset of I'm trying to sell to the everyman. If that is your outlook, you are going to be losing some value. You are losing pricing amounts on what you're selling. You need to be thinking about who is somebody who's going to buy your product and appreciate it for how much time you put into it, for how much value you've created, for how much time you've saved them. And this is really tricky to quantify sometimes, but you've got to be thinking about what you are saving your client. That could be time, that can be money, that can be expertise. What is it that you're offering to this person? So value again is not always just about dollars and cents. Sometimes it can be time. Sometimes it can be skill. So we need to think a little bit about that too. And again, service businesses are really hard here. This is why revenue is directly proportional to the time that you're putting into it. That's why developing a product that you can eventually market or lease or license is an incredible way to scale something. So if you've happened to develop maybe you're a screen printer and you find a quicker way to dry your shirts, or you find a quicker way to more cleanly press those lines onto your shirts, and you happen to make your own device for that, patent it. Like finding these little loopholes, like, oh yeah, this is a little device I made because I think it's great. There are so many opportunities for you. All you have to do is hop onto the USPTO website and start to sift it. Costs for patents are often exorbitant, but that is where our old friend Pro Bono comes in. You can partner with different law firms in the area, and please reach out to me because I know several. We have partnered with them to help four of our different PD students go through the design and utility patent process, and they haven't paid a dime for it. So if you have something that you think you might be able to patent that has helped you with what you're producing, that could be another good opportunity for you apart from just producing something over and over. Maybe this is something that other entrepreneurs elsewhere could take advantage of and use. Maybe it's something that you could sell yourself at various stores. Okay, so Brian, let's go to the next one. This one is hard because it's comfortable. We always think about using discounts as a great way to get people to come to our booth, to come and talk to us, to hop on our website. And I'm not saying that you can never use discounts, but they need to be occasional. They cannot be consistent. And even apart from discounts, we need to be thinking about what are other ways that instead of using discounts, what can we do in terms of promotions? What about bonuses? What about other features that we could add on to drive sales? Instead of taking money out of your pocket, instead of saying, if you buy two, I'll give you the second one for half off. What if you were able to, sell multiple, or if you provide a service, what's a good way that you could get somebody signed on for 3 months instead of just giving them 1 or 2 lessons? Let's try to think about these more sort of long-term opportunities instead of just an instantaneous, take this for 20% off. Thanks for coming to my booth. And there's no real guarantee they're ever going to come back and see you. So we've got to think more creatively about finding ways to maintain a long-term relationship with our consumer. Uh, Last one, bro. This one is also pretty painful. A lot of people, especially in the creative community, were probably told that, hey, this is great. I do this, or I know a friend who does this, and this is how much they sell their products for. You could totally do this. That's great to be aware of what your creative neighbors are charging for similar products and services, but no two people are really creating the same materials. It's very uncommon for two people to provide the same kinds of services also. Everyone produces something unique, and it's totally reasonable to rationalize why your product should cost more. You also have no idea if your friends have properly priced themselves at all. They could be hemorrhaging money. Their value could be in the gutter for all you know. And that could be one of the main reasons they're selling so much product, is because they're undervaluing what they've done. So be aware of it, but be extremely careful, because they could, be skewing, or they could be heavily discounting. So we're never quite sure. Um, but make sure that you're taking care and pricing your own business based on your revenue needs. Okay. All right. Next one, Brian. So now let's start to talk a little bit about negotiation. This one is usually what makes people the squirmiest. I had to get over this really quickly. My wife, her father is German, and I grew up in the Southeast, and so things that for me feel like they're supposed to be taboo topics, he doesn't care about. I mean, one of the first meetings we had a dinner together. And he asked me, he's like, "So how much money did you make last year?" And I like almost hyperventilated. It's like, oh my God, you can't ask that, can you? And he just looked around at people and still expected an answer. And it's like, can we talk about that later? Um, I'm not recommending that you do that, but we need to get more comfortable being uncomfortable. So there's this really great guy who used to be an FBI negotiator. His name's Christopher Voss, but he talks about successful negotiation as, honestly, it's not always about getting a yes. Yeses are great, but yeses don't protect your value, your time, your mental health as much as a no does. A no actually has more value than a yes for you. You need to be in charge of a yes or a no, not just leave it up to the person you're negotiating with. And that's a really tricky hurdle to get over. So, mastering the no and understanding what a path to an agreement is. It does not mean that you just accept whatever deal that gets put in front of you. And that's where it starts to become tricky. So I'm going to show you a template for rethinking negotiations. So, Brian, we go to the next slide. I don't think this show is on anymore. It used to be pretty successful when I was in high school. It was called Deal or No Deal. And I was always puzzled because it's a really interesting thought experiment. These people would go on stage, and there's like 30 different containers in front of them. And I think they go up to like a pretty high amount. It's like $5 million. But you start pulling different cases away, and this mysterious figure in the shadows will offer you a certain amount of money to stop playing the game at any point. It's just really a game of chance. You're just picking in the hopes that whatever suit or briefcase that you get will be worth a lot of money. And I was always puzzled because I would think, well, wouldn't it be reasonable if you just went into playing this game and just say, once I get an offer over a certain threshold, I just have to quit? Like, you have to go in prepared. You can't just go in and let the game play havoc with you, because if you do that, your emotions are going to get the better of you. And it's the same recommendation that Chris Voss gives everyone in negotiations. And it's really uncommon that you go in with a single figure. So he talks about having a zone of possible acceptance, calls it a ZOPA. And I'll show you in a second what it looks like. But for a good negotiation, you need to go in prepared for a spectrum of possibilities. You can't just go in with a single digit in mind or a single outcome. You've got to be thinking about a bunch of different variables. And again, it's not always just monetary. We'll talk about those in a second, but it's not always just an amount that you can make. And then the other is the best alternatives to a negotiated agreement. That's just a fancy way of saying, what is the backup that I have, and what is the backup that this person that I'm negotiating with has? What do they have in their back pocket? If we both walk, what could they get from this? Because that puts pressure on them to make a deal with you. So let's look at an example here. So if you see the engineer as the negotiator, this looks like a much more complicated table than it really is. The engineer's on one side, and then the company that they're negotiating with is on the other side. That little bar in the middle, the Zopa, is the sweet spot where, again, there's a lot of different variables here that would ultimately result in both parties agreeing. And sometimes it's monetary, sometimes it's related to a job title, sometimes it's related to how long maybe you're a painter. You want to, instead of just staying in a residency opportunity or in um, a gallery for 1 week, maybe you chop it down to maybe say like, yeah, I want to do a 3 week stay, and then I also want first refusal on the next time that you're going to have an art show. It does not always have to be related to a commission amount or just a dollar figure. So again, keep these in mind: spectrum and then backup opportunities. Those backup opportunities always put pressure on the person that you're negotiating with to close the deal. And that's your goal ultimately, is to find something that you agree on. So let's look at a couple of final negotiation tips because we're running out of time and I want to make sure we have a few minutes for questions. So these are really valuable. These are lessons that we've learned, that pretty much any negotiation book that you're going to come across is going to tell you. Negotiation is not personal. If somebody doesn't agree with you or if they assess your work, it is not a slight on you as a human. You just might not be able to find an agreeable amount sometimes, and that's okay. Assessing your work objectively is really hard, and it's really hard to not get offended because they're like our children. Sometimes, if we make something we really care about, you're probably gonna sometimes overvalue it, sometimes undervalue it, but it's really hard to come up with that appropriate, proper value. This is another important one: want versus need for compensation. I would love to get paid $20,000 for every gig I do. I would love it. That's a great want. Do I need that? No. Is it ever going to happen? No. Unlikely. The amount of money that you should be looking for is that sweet spot somewhere in between your want and your need. And that's going to give you a good profit margin and a good cushion that you can continue to grow. But it's uncommon that you're going to get either of those because there's such disparate sides of the spectrum. You can't really ever go for your need. It needs to be higher than your need, and it's almost always going to be considerably lower than your want. And that's healthy. It should be in between those. What we spoke about a second ago, value does not always look like dollars and cents. It can look like, having future opportunities or having first refusal or first pick of a booth if you're going to a large trade show. There's all kinds of other ways that you can take advantage of negotiation. Small talk often equals a big impact. Sure, many of you too, when you were kids, you wanted something, maybe a video game, maybe a card game, maybe a doll of some variety. It's uncommon that you're just gonna, bulldoze into the conversation with your parents or your guardians and lead with exactly what you want. Softening the person that you're talking to, finding common ground, even if it's as simple as a shared restaurant that you enjoy, or even if it's something as simple as a sport that you like or a team that you pull for, or maybe you have a family member that goes to the same college that person graduated with. Those are like little points in your bucket that you can take advantage of. You're building up credit that you can then deploy in your negotiation. It will soften the person that you're talking to. It's not manipulative, it's just building a relationship. And then embracing the negotiation. Be confident, try to enjoy it. If you go into it and you're really anxious about it, it's going to show. So the more that you can try to relax and try to go into it as confidently and as comfortably as possible, it'll yield dividends. So, Brad, can we go to the next slide?
Absolutely.
I snuck in our boy Roman here. I don't think you've seen this one yet. Value also matters significantly for your mental and emotional health. It is so easy, if you are not making deals or if you're selling products or services lower than what you think you're worth, it's going to take a huge toll on you. You are going to feel undervalued as a person. And there's not always advice on that. You've got to think about what is a healthier way to sometimes detach from your work. You've got to think about what recharges you. And you've got to also tell yourself that you are not your work. You can detach from it. You are a human. You are not the products that you're producing. So that's another mindset that's just incredibly valued. Just to be able to acknowledge that is important. And honestly, it doesn't feel that bad if you don't make a deal sometimes, because I mean this is something that Brian and I experienced recently because we really wanted to make this deal with a school from the Northeast, and they were offering us significantly lower than we had the time or the ability to provide them a good product in that amount of time. And it kind of felt like they were kind of trying to bully us into it. And eventually, we just could not find common ground. We were significantly higher on the amount of money it would take us to rewrite an entire presentation and to update their pre-COVID outlooks to like a post-COVID world that's entirely different. And you just can't do that effectively. We didn't want to give them a bad product. And it felt bad for a few days. And then I realized really quickly, like, yeah, anything we could have given them, it would have been terrible. We made the right choice. So it doesn't feel good in that moment, but after a few days, it feels significantly better. Um, and then let's go to the final slide, Brian. So these are the 3 books that I push all teachers, all students, all early stage entrepreneurs to read. And they're really valuable at different stages. Founded is incredible as like if you're scaffolding and you don't know where to start at all. Founded is incredible. How I built this is amazing for any hurdles that you're going to hit. You're going to look and see all the friction points that some of the most famous brands have had to encounter. And even though they've scaled and they might be billion-dollar businesses, at their core, they're still trying to solve problems. And then originals is a fantastic idea. If you've already had an idea, you've already made a business, and you're trying to think about what would be another unique direction I want to go in. What does nonconformity look like? How do I take advantage of different market inefficiencies? Adam Grant's a genius. Melissa Kaufman and Mike Robb are incredible. Guy Raz is incredible. His podcast is amazing if you haven't ever listened to it. But that's it. Thank you for giving us your attention. We've got a few minutes left for questions. I'm also happy to hang around for a bit as well. And then we've got our information here as well. So if you do have to jet, if you need to go to dinner or take care of your kids, Brian, there's one more slide, I think. If you want to call us or email us, we're here in Charlotte. We're always happy to help. Let us know if there's ways that we can support you. So if anyone has any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Wow, thank you guys so much. This was impactful and thoughtful, and also I feel like just the tip of the iceberg. We have a lot, we could probably go into each of these slides for a lot longer, but really appreciate all the words.
Yes, thanks everyone
and
for having
advice.
us. That was a lot
Yeah,
of fun.
you so
Thank you
much
all.
for taking the time to
Awesome.
be with us.
Does anyone if you have a question, you can throw it in the chat or just go off mute. We have a couple of minutes.
Yes, I've got a quick question.
Hey, Will.
Hey, Sethu. So my name is Will White. I'm a fashion illustrator and designer. And in your experiences, are there pertinent junctures that you want to reevaluate the costs that you are applying to your products or services?
Yeah, I usually go on a 3-month timetable. I mean, the consulting business that Brian and I have, just because we work a lot with independent schools and public schools and educational organizations, and that is a wide variety of access to funds. We will do jobs for free if we really care about the organization. If it's other organizations that we know that, like, yeah, they could afford to support their teachers better, we'll go a different route. But I usually encourage students and other faculty members every 3 months. You want to look back at your statements and you want to think about which of my products are selling the best? Could I get a better margin on it? And if I were to tweak the price a little bit, do I think I could still sell the same amount, but make a little bit more each one?
Perfect. Thank you. Thank y'all.
Oh, of course.
Anyone else? Feel free to just come off mute.
I have a question.
Okay.
This is Elena.
Hello.
Hey. Hi. So I'm just starting out. I've got several products that I'm interested in marketing, and I wanted to see, I'm at the point where I want to see what the demand would be before I put sort of all my eggs in one basket. So
yeah,
something might be jewelry, something might be having to do with upcycling, something else, something, it could be my visual work. And I can't obviously do everything at once. So how does one approach this? Like, I don't have a a market in mind. I haven't identified my audience. I know the price points I need to be at are, for people I hang around with or the people I know, it's just not in their price points. So, yeah, so I know there's a lot of trial and error in this, but ideally there'd be less error. How do you approach this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a really, I hate to say this because you've probably heard it previously, but that's a cool problem to have, that you have the flexibility and the ability to start a couple of different opportunities and endeavors like that. Eric Ries wrote a book called The Lean Startup. I would encourage you to just give that a look. He talks about this concept of an MVP, and it's called a minimum viable product. You need to figure out in each of those categories, what is the minimum viable product that you think you could take to market, that you could start to get feedback on without using as much time or as many resources as absolutely possible. And so maybe you make, it's not quite a prototype, it's a little bit past a prototype, but it's something that you can show to people, that you could get feedback on. It doesn't have to be something that you sell, but it's something that you could put in front of friends. And sometimes friends are really terrible at advice because they're not honest. They're too loving to be honest. So you want to try to find people who will give you objective responses on how they would value it. And you can also talk to other people who are in that field. They don't have to be friends, but you'd be surprised at how supportive people who might eventually become your competitors would be while you're just starting. Like they're really kind very often, and they're often very willing to just sit down with you for coffee or to give you feedback on something that you've made.
Thank you. Could you tell me the name of that book again? The
Oh,
Lean.
I'll put it in the chat. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
I just wanted to, maybe we can stay till about 7:05. Does that work for everyone? I want to try to hit some of these questions. So, Esther, just to confirm for Esther, sorry, Esther, are you recommending a high yield savings account as a business account?
I think if you're just starting, I think that's almost a no-brainer. I mean, you can, as you scale, you will probably get better opportunities to grow into better accounts like that. But if you're just starting, yeah, I think I would do that as my initial business account where my money goes. I mean, if you have a Venmo account, I would attach it to that before I would attach it to my normal checking account or my normal savings account.
Yeah, James, I was going to echo what you said. I said if you're starting off, 100% get a high yield one. As your business scales and you get bigger and bigger, James, jump in if I'm incorrect here, but it's like let's say you get your LLC. Well, then you'll want a business banking account, right? So it's under the LLC's name, and then there definitely have a business savings account and make it a high yield one for sure. So for right now, I think a personal one obviously will have to act as your business one, right? Until you scale up to that LLC level, where you'll then have a business bank account. James, do you agree with that?
Yeah, you're spot on. And a lot of companies, LLCs are important, but this wasn't really in the purview of the conversation, but LLCs will usually cost you between like 150 and $200 in North Carolina, and they'll last for a year, but you have to maintain that. You have to update it every year, and it costs money. Um, you don't always need to file for an LLC. It depends on
Mhm.
what sort of market you're in. So be careful that you're not just setting up an LLC just because you think you should have one. If you don't have intellectual property and you're not producing something that people are likely to like sue you over, and again, we live in
Right.
an extremely litigious society, but think
Mhm.
of an LLC like a shield. Somebody has to break through your shield before they can attack you. So an LLC exists to be sued. And if somebody bankrupts your LLC, that means that they can't come after your personal assets.
Great. Laura, did James and Brian answer your question? Laura Morrow? Yes. Okay, great. And then the final one I see here is from Wesley. When it comes to things like sharing webinars, trainings, how do you recommend navigating the temptation to make it free and hope to connect for other opportunities that will be paying gigs versus charging?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a classic kind of get your foot in the door technique, right? I mean, if you have any children, you look at their phone, they have video game apps, right? Almost all of those use a freemium model where it's free to download it. And then if you want to get upgrades, you will pay for it. So what could work is that you have sort of a fractional webinar. and you allow the first 20 minutes to be for free, but if you want to stay on, then you might paywall it. You might say the first 20 are free, and then to stay on, you need to pay 99 cents. Or, you get one for free, and then you buy them in a package of 3 potentially, and then you have to pay for a few more after that. But yeah, I'm not always a big advocate of doing things for free unless there's some sort of gateway to, having the next few as sort of paid opportunities. Um, I guess it also depends on what platform you're on, but yeah, happy to talk about that more at length though.
Great. Cool.
It's certainly tempting though. I
Oh,
totally
go ahead,
understand.
James.
I was just saying it's extremely tempting though. I mean, that's one of the easiest ways to get people on board, right? Free is hard to turn down. The problem is free might become the expectation. And if free becomes the expectation by your customer, you'll never be able to monetize. It's like what we talked about earlier. You can't go from being a lax teacher to being a strict teacher. It's almost impossible.
Well, James, Brian, guys, thank you so much for your time, your expertise. For everyone who joined, this is definitely not the end of James and Brian at Charlotte is Creative. We are definitely going to tap them for more conversations like this, more in-person opportunities. But we really value everything that you've brought and shared. And thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you again for this opportunity. If anybody needs anything, please reach out to us, phone or email or LinkedIn, anything.
It's very kind. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right,
Absolutely.
everyone.
Thank
Have a
y'all.
great night. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.